Hey students, my name is David, and today we're in week 2 of this series called Bittersweet. We've been talking about how when someone hurts us, it can feel sweet at first to hold a grudge against them and be bitter towards them, but in the end, bitterness and grudge holding, it only ends up harming us and it leaves a bad taste in our mouth. As we talked about last week, the best thing that we can do when we've been hurt is to forgive. And when we don't forgive, we think that we're getting back at the person who hurt us, but really, we're only hurting ourselves worse. And while bitterness and grudge holding will get us nowhere and it offers us no benefits whatsoever, forgiveness, on the other hand, is such a freeing thing for us. We need to forgive for our benefit. I think that we get that we need to forgive, but I also think that it's easier said than done. Now, we can talk all day long about how good the idea of forgiveness sounds, but when it comes to actually doing it, that's another story. Chances are you don't have to think very long or very hard to come up with a time when someone hurt you or treated you unfairly, or you were let down. And when we are let down or hurt by others, we have a tendency to react in a few ways. We get frustrated, we get angry, we get distant, or we try to get even. But no matter how we react, the truth is the same. Because of the unfairness or the hurt, a relationship with somebody has been broken, it's damaged, and it's not right in some way. And everything we do is in reaction to that. We find small ways to be dismissive or rude to them, and we set out to get revenge however we can. In a lot of ways, our reaction feels justified because we feel like they did something wrong to us, and we feel like we're right to be upset as we are. But that leaves us with the question, where do we go from here? If they're wrong and we're right, does that mean we're justified in how we treat them, no matter how bad that might be? Does it mean that we are off the hook and we won't be held responsible for how we handle our relationship with them? Does that mean we get a pass for some of our most hateful behavior because of what they did? I mean, not being mad or not being frustrated or not creating distance can feel like you are saying that what was done to you was okay. And the last thing that you want to do is send a message that you're okay with how you were treated, or that the person can just keep on mistreating you because it wasn't that big of a deal. That's obviously not what you want to say. In some situations, that idea of forgiveness can seem weak, it can seem irresponsible, unfair even. And in all situations, forgiveness is just plain tough. That's why today we're going to look at a passage from the book of Romans. It was a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to a church in Rome. Rome was the very heart of the largest empire that has ever existed in history. It was like the New York City of its day. And this letter was written to people who were there who had just started following Jesus. So put yourself in their shoes for a minute. These believers found themselves surrounded by people who were as far from being followers of Jesus as possible. In fact, Christianity was a new movement and it was spreading fast. And the leaders of Rome, they really didn't like that growth that they were seeing. They didn't think it was a good thing, which made the new followers of Jesus a major target, public enemy number one. And if you're living as a targeted group in one of the most violent cities in the world at the time, the chances are good that you might be feeling that things are unfair or unjust. You might feel like the Roman leaders were the enemy and you were just an innocent citizen. And you were right, and you should have the freedom to get even or get mad or hold a grudge for how you're being mistreated, because if anyone is a problem here, of course, it's the powerful Romans who are treating you unfairly. Like, they had the power, they were doing the things that were unfair. But here, in this letter, Paul doesn't give the Christians a pass to be angry or bitter. In fact, he changes the focus to be entirely on them. He says it's about you. It's not about the people that are persecuting you. Here's what he writes. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, some might possibly be willing to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. In other words, he says to them, maybe there's another way to look at this situation. We're no longer focused on making a case for what's fair or unfair, what's just or unjust when it comes to how Christians are being treated. We're talking about how God's love for you. See, when you understand who God really is, it changes everything, even how you see forgiveness. The truth is, when we've gotten it all wrong, when we have done plenty to deserve punishment, when we didn't deserve it, God extended love. He didn't hold back. He saw you and he saw me at our very worst, and he didn't even flinch. He moved in our direction by sending Jesus with no conditions. See, whether you're a teenager in the 21st century or you're living back in the first century like these Roman Christians were, the temptation is that when we're wronged, to get so caught up in what was done to us by the other person and to think about what they deserve that we forget how often we get things wrong ourselves. The temptation is to look at all the people who've wronged us and to dismiss them, to move the focus from ourselves and onto the wrongs of those people. But Paul is saying, God looked at what we did, and yet he didn't dismiss us. God loved us, and he dismissed our sin. He didn't cancel us, he canceled our wrongs. God doesn't give up on us. Now let me make just a quick pause here to make sure I'm being clear. I am by no means saying that when you are treated unfairly, or when people abuse you or take advantage of you, that they get a pass to keep on doing it. And in fact, if you're experiencing abuse, I encourage you, I plead with you, talk to a trusted adult and get some help, because you should not be in that situation. But wherever you're at, here's the thing. When we start to realize how God forgives our wrongs against Him and chooses to love us no matter what, then we have to ask ourselves, what does that mean for how we see others who have hurt us? Others who have treated us unfairly. Paul answers this question for us in his letter to the church of Colossae. He says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, with kindness, with humility, with gentleness and patience." And here's where he talks about forgiveness. He says, "Bear with each other and forgive with one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity." Colossians 3:12-14. Bear with each other. That's a picture of carrying the weight of others' imperfections together. It's this picture of patient commitment to seeing each other as human instead of villain, even when that's super challenging to do. Because of what God has done for us, because He extended love to us at all costs, we're called to do the same for others, to forgive as we were forgiven, with no strings attached, with no conditions, with nothing held back. The truth is, this can be hard for us to accept when it comes to others and how we treat them and how we see them, but it can be just as difficult when it comes to how we treat ourselves, how we see ourselves. Because for some of you, you are probably harder on yourself than you are on others. And for us, Paul says the exact same thing. Jesus isn't stingy with His love or His forgiveness. He offers you and I both love and forgiveness at the very same time. And if God has forgiven us, if God has made us right, and He sees us as we were meant to be, then we should see ourselves the exact same way. But here's what this doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that we treat what was done to us or what we did to ourselves as no big deal. Paul isn't downplaying the root problem or excusing the wrong we did against someone else or the wrong that was done against us. He's saying that whatever has been done to you, however unfair it was, that was a real big deal. It was real. But just as God looks at you and the mistakes you have made and sees you as more than the stuff you've done wrong, we need to see the people who have treated us unfairly, who have wronged us. We need to see them as more than the wrong that they've done. God set the standard here, and God's forgiveness shows us exactly how we should see ourselves and others. And in a world where everyone is looking to find faults, where everybody's looking to dig up dirt on each other, in a world where everyone is looking to find faults with each other, where everyone's looking to dig up dirt on each other, in a world where there's so many bitter people holding grudges against each other, Jesus calls us to be different, and He asks us to forgive. And He has every right to ask us to forgive, because He first forgave us. He forgave us for a whole lot more than we'll ever have to forgive others from. When it comes to forgiveness, we need to cancel the debt, not the person. We do this because the offense was real, but it doesn't tell the whole story about the person who wronged us. Just like the things that we have done wrong don't tell the whole story about who we are. God has always looked at us and seen us as more than the stuff we have done wrong, and more than the sin we have committed. God looks at us and sees us as someone to love, so God forgives. And now we are called to do the same thing for others. So how do we cancel the debt and not the person? How do we stop being hard on ourselves and others when they get it wrong or we do? How do we bear with each other, like Paul talks about? How do we stay focused on God's unstopping love? Well, here's some places to start. Identify where you need more compassion in your life. Maybe you are way harder on yourself than others, and forgiving yourself is much harder for you to do, so you need to start forgiving yourself. Maybe you need more compassion for others and forgive them. Determine which you tend to lean towards and pay attention to that. Figure out the areas where you might need to show compassion more, and then work on practicing it. And then ask yourself these questions. Who am I mentally canceling or only seeing as the wrong that they did? What do I need to do to start seeing them or seeing myself as God does? Once you've identified who you need to forgive them. Then forgive them. Then forgive them again and again until forgiveness takes root in your heart and you begin to overcome the bitterness. Remember, nobody is perfect. Whether you're holding yourself or someone else to that standard, it's impossible to meet. And it's only going to lead you to frustration and disappointment because people are going to let you down. You're going to let yourself down, and you can't control that. But what we can control is how we handle ourselves when we get hurt and disappointed. Can we forgive others? Can we forgive ourselves? Can we make an effort to seek out forgiveness from those we may have hurt? In other words, no one is going to get it right 100% of the times, but we can get really good at making it right when things go wrong. And we do that when we forgive, or we cancel the debt, the wrongs against us. We do that when we remember that people are more than their mistakes and that there is more to the story than just their wrongdoings. We do this when we remember that God hasn't held our sins our wrongs against us, and we shouldn't hold others against them. For everybody, forgiveness is a challenge. It doesn't come naturally to me, your group leaders, or anybody else, and it probably will never be easy. In fact, it will probably always be easier to cancel a person than it is to cancel their wrong. But this idea of forgiveness is something we do because of what God has done for us. As unnatural and as difficult as it might feel, we don't give up on it because it was modeled first to us by Jesus Christ. That's why we do small groups here, because as challenging as forgiveness is, man, it's so much harder if you're trying to do it all by yourself, doing it alone. But you have your small group as a source of encouragement and strength to serve as a reminder to you that you're not the only one trying to make forgiveness a reality. So when you're trying to forgive, count on them. Lean on them to help you figure out who you need to forgive and how to make that kind of forgiveness a reality in your life. Remember, forgiveness is the best thing that you can do with the worst stuff that happened to you. Remember that you have been forgiven by Jesus first so you can forgive others. And remember, you matter so much to us and you matter so much to Jesus.